It's okay.
Andrew.
It's okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second stakeholder meeting for docket number 2024-0200, investigation into electricity wheeling. My name is Abby Raup. I'm an economist with the Commission, and I'll be helping to facilitate some of the discussions for today. As many of you know from participating in this docket already and coming today, the Commission has invited stakeholders to provide feedback throughout this investigatory docket process. And the Commission issued a proposed work plan last month, January 31st, via the Commission's Case and Docket Management System, otherwise known as CDMS. Including the proposed work plan includes draft definitions, a draft statement of issues, a procedural schedule of upcoming stakeholder meetings to further refine this investigation. The purpose of today's meeting is to invite feedback on the proposed work plan. You can provide feedback on any aspect of the work plan in today's meeting or in writing. Anytime before March 21st, so about 1 month. Some housekeeping items before we begin. Please note that today's meeting is being recorded and the recording will be posted online to the Commission's YouTube channel. As with other meetings hosted by the Commission, we ask that each participant be respectful when speaking and of all the perspectives shared today. As this is a hybrid meeting, here is some guidance for those who are joining remotely. Please mute yourself if you are not presenting or speaking. Please raise your hand using the raise hand feature on WebEx. Alternatively, you may physically raise your hand on screen if your camera is turned on. Please lower your hand when you are done speaking. You can also leverage the chat feature on WebEx to ask questions or submit comments. Commission staff will monitor the chat and elevate questions and comments raised. While this meeting is open to the public for viewing in the interest of time and to ensure that the Commission's agenda is fully addressed, the Commission asks that if members of the public wish to ask questions, that their questions be submitted as a public comment filed on the Commission's Case and Docket Management System. We'll provide an overview of how to do that later on in this meeting. Last thing, for those attending in person, the restrooms are located in the basement 1 floor down. The restroom codes are posted by the exit doors. I will now turn it over to Chair Asuncion, followed by Commissioner Yost to provide opening remarks.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Abby. I just wanted to update you folks on a bill that is going through the legislature, in particular Senate Bill 133. It was decided today. They took the amendments that we provided, and actually it was the prior committee, Energy and Intergovernmental Affairs and governmental operations, noted there that they would move the date that the report was due from this working group to the end of 2026. So in the bill that came out of the committee, they only changed it in the preamble. So then we proposed that they change it also in the body of language kind. So that was accepted today. So there's going to be a Senate Draft 2 coming out. And I believe it then goes to the other side. So basically it gives us, this working group, another year to do it. But my understanding too is they want to include now retail wheeling. So everything, not just the intergovernmental piece. We did let them know that this working group was stood up and they took that testimony, but then they still want to. Basically, I know out of energy, they said they wanted to make sure to give us enough time to do a good job. Senator Kai, the chair of Energy Committee, thought that 2025, this year, was too soon to do a good job. But then if you read the bill, it's not only focused on intergovernmental wheeling like it was last session. So that's something to I know today you guys are also going to talk about definition. There is a definition in the bill that the legislature is working with. So uh, my suggestion is if we come up with a quote unquote better definition here, that's what we go to the ledge with, right? We go to the ledge and said, this working group would rather have this definition to be the working definition of wheeling. Now, they only looked at wheeling, right? So I'm not sure if we have copies of that language in the bill that we can put up as you guys are working through it, and you can take a look. But if not, it is Senate Bill 133. If you take a look at that, even the Senate Draft 1, they have a certain definition, and I don't think they changed that definition today. So that's what they're working with. And then what I'm saying is for us, if we're going to come up with a different version of the definition that would help the working group, that, right, well, we would, I know in our testimony, we would probably go as it crosses over to the House to try to change it so that everything matches up, right? That we're not trying to do two different things on what the legislature expects us to do it versus what we want to get done in this docket. So again, like I said in the first meeting, right? I'm not expecting the working group is to really help the commission determine if first and foremost wheeling is in the public interest, right? And that's the first and fine. And I'm okay if the report comes out fine. At the same time, right, this bill has given us kind of like more things to think about and more things to look at. So I think that's still in line, right? I think they want to see a report from us by next year, December next year. So before the 2027 session. And usually those reports too, if we need to change statutory language, et cetera, right? That's all in that report. So at a minimum, right, we're going to have a report. We're going to say whether or not it's in the public interest. And more than likely what the legislature would probably want to see is, well, what would make it work, right? Because they're very interested in having some type of wheeling, right? But I think we got, we convinced them that, doing it the docket route versus, right, just the mandate route from the legislature is much better. So at least for the Senate, they're doing that now. Well, I haven't been tracking the House side on the. You don't have a.
Yeah,
Okay.
we try to look it up. I don't know if I can see how, there was no wheeling yet.
Yeah, there's no wheeling. Yeah, so this is going to be the vehicle. So
Yeah.
goes over to the House. I know Representative Lowen has heard, wheeling before. It's come before a committee. CPN is a different chair. So, right. And I'm not sure where Matayoshi is on the concept of wheeling, right? It used to be Nakashima. So we might have to go in and educate him if the bill gets to his committee. But that's all I got.
Thanks, Leo. Is this microphone working, Andrew? Okay. What I wanted to do is just to reference the commission's 2024 inclinations on the future of energy in Hawaii, which have now become public. And there is a section on page 11 of those inclinations that specifically talks about wheeling. And so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. And the potential legislation does complicate things somewhat, but I think there likely will still be a fairly clear distinction between intergovernmental wheeling and any kind of retail wheeling construct or framework. So we'd appreciate your thoughtfulness and insight as to what the differences are in those two different situations, and how we should consider them differently potentially. And I think there still is, from our point of view, as we discussed in the inclinations, a fair amount of urgency in figuring out how we get government entities specifically to be more significant players in the development of renewable energy in Hawaii. They've got access to land, they've got money, hopefully. They have motivation for sure to help push this along and accelerate away from oil. The whole sort of an overarching theme of the inclinations is that we've got a shared responsibility, all of us, a collective responsibility to try to achieve results that we have not yet achieved, that we wanted to achieve earlier, and bringing more renewable resources online. And so clearly government's got a significant role to play. And to the extent that we can come up with, as we discussed in the inclinations, a simple compensation formula and framework that incentivizes intergovernmental wheeling, fairly compensates utilities, saves the government money on electricity, and lowers costs for ratepayers. If we can come up with that construct, like that's highly desirable and something that should help the state's policies move forward. So just wanted to draw your attention to that. And I really appreciate all the effort.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioner Yost. Before we dive into the agenda today, I wanted to briefly go around the room and do some introductions. For those of you joining remotely, please put your name, title, and affiliation in the chat. Okay, let's start going around the room. Would you like to start?
Pass this around. Is this on? All right, good afternoon. Peter Young, Director of the Pricing Division, responsible for rates and cost recovery at Hawaiian Electric.
Hi, good afternoon. Ken Aramaki, Director of Transmission, Distribution, and Interconnection Planning at Hawaiian Electric.
Hi, everyone. James Abraham. I'm Associate General Counsel at Hawaiian Electric.
We'll just use this one. Tayson Kim, Engineer at the PUC.
Naomi Kawai, Commissioner.
Aloha, everyone. I'm Harley Broyles, Associate Attorney, Earth Justice.
Kylie Wager Cruz, Attorney with Earth Justice.
Colin Yost, Commissioner.
Kelly Earls, Commission Counsel.
Anand Samtani, Economist.
Carissa Boniface, Regulatory Assistant with the State Energy Office.
Leo Asuncion, Chair of the PUC.
Randy Baltimore, Chief of Policy and Research, PUC.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Doug Podaga, Outside Counsel for Ulupono Initiative.
Mark Asano, Director of Integrated Grid Planning, Hawaiian Electric.
Thank you, and thank you to those online. I see those are coming in. Okay, awesome. Can we pull up the agenda? Thanks again, for being here, and I hope we can have a really lively discussion. The agenda that you guys see is an overview of the discussion topics for today. First, we're going to go over the working definitions for electricity wheeling and intergovernmental wheeling. Next, we'll discuss whether the wheeling electric customer should only be permitted to sell excess energy to the incumbent utility, or if the wheeling customer should be able to provide the generation to connected agencies using the incumbent utility's infrastructure. Our last discussion topic will be on general implementation interest and concerns presented by state agencies, including any additional review of available space for possible site locations of renewable generation. All those topics are again outlined in the proposed work plan on the Commission's case and docket management system. And then closing, we'll overview upcoming stakeholder meetings, including the proposed topics, and then we'll leave time for next steps and any closing remarks. So we went ahead and pulled up the definition in the bill that Chair mentioned earlier, SB 133. So we'll spend a brief moment just highlighting that since it was referenced, and then move on to the Commission's proposed definition to help gauge kind of the contrast there. So I'll give everyone a second to read it, and then I'll also read it. So it says, for the purposes of this section, wheeling means the transmission of electric power from one state facility's point of generation to the facilities of other state agencies over the existing transmission lines of a third-party electric utility. Does anyone have any initial feedback they'd like to share regarding this draft definition presented by the legislature? Anyone online?
Yeah, if you have any like questions or, amendments or concerns about it, are you guys okay with this particular definition? You just want to get your feedback.
Would it require, as Commissioner Yost brought up at the last meeting, would it require electrons to reach a certain point? Or would it still allow for just more of a credit-based system?
I'll jump in. I think that's ambiguous. I don't think it's a very clear definition. Also, isn't as Chair said, isn't this statute supposedly looking at intergovernmental and retail wheeling? Because this definition does not include retail wheeling. It's only talking about state agencies. So is that just a kind of a drafting problem in the bill, or?
I think there might be a definition of retail wheeling as well.
Sorry, I think what the chair was saying was that there's a new version coming out that they're gonna, is that right?
This particular version is still in the bill. There's another portion of the bill that does talk about, right, the study that we would have to, the report that we would have to kind that they want to see retail.
The retail, right. Yeah, so I think the current definition here is just intergovernmental.
Yeah.
That's what it appears.
So one comment I have is that this is only contemplating state to state. And I know we have a lot of participants in this working group who are county. I know the PUC was discussing with federal agencies. So that's one limitation, that this would seem to only allow state to state.
Yeah, I mean, I think we already proposed in the proposed work plan, a little bit broader definition. So I would suggest that we consider providing feedback to the legislature to broaden this definition, because I don't think it's all that meaningful from a technical point of view, and it's also too limited, as Council just mentioned. So,
You know that part of the report includes like kind of if it's in the public interest, and we have to kind of use a baseline, right? First, and so that's kind of the baseline. That's what Ledge gave us to us, right? So we had to come back and say, well, we agree with you, or we don't agree with you. If we don't agree, what do you want to change or amend? So that's why we have to start with this, this portion. That's what they're proposing to us. So that's why we wanted to ask you, and when you see in the work plan, what we have as definitions, if you agree with that, or you wanted to stick with this one, I'm not sure. That's what we're just trying to get some feedback on that.
Okay, one other thing I just want to point out is, I think in reading some of the agency's comments that were filed in the docket, some are contemplating within the same agency kind of a crediting system, whereas this definition seems to be from one state agency, one state agency facility to other state agencies. So it's maybe not contemplating or capturing within the same agency on different locations.
This is Henry. This is also only with state agencies and not county agencies, correct?
So it's online, so I say something for some, Henry. Go ahead. Anything is. Henry, could you please repeat that?
Yes, unmute himself.
It's on mute. Yes, unmute. We can, yeah. Kylie, I was just going to mention that, you're talking about electrons. Yeah, that's why it's kind of ambiguous, right? Because it almost sounds like it's going from like one point to another, which is not, cannot be happening, right? Unless you're going over different lines, so you can't direct the electrons to go specific to another point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, we agree that needs some clarification there.
It also seems to limit it to transmission lines.
Oh, yeah, like distribution.
Yeah. I think the other one is more broad on infrastructure.
Thanks everyone for those initial comments. We'll, wait a second, for Henry and then move on to the proposed work plans definition.
Did you
Henry,
hear
if
my
you could
comment?
come off mute.
He said he can't hear the speaker.
Oh,
You can't hear me.
Agencies. Yeah, put in the chat, county agencies.
oh, cool. Thanks, Mike.
Henry, is your question as to making sure that the definition includes county agencies? Okay, yeah, so someone captured that as well. Thanks.
Anyone else online, or are we good to move forward? Okay, not seeing any. We will move on to our proposed work plan definition. Andrew, if you could advance the slide. Thank you. So here is again, the proposed work plans definition for electricity wheeling. I'll give everyone a second to sit with it, but also read it aloud. The process by which a customer of an incumbent electric utility exports electricity generated from renewable sources, either through a partnership with a private developer or through self-generation or co-ownership of generation, and such exported electricity is transmitted via the infrastructure owned by the incumbent utility for the benefit of a geographically separate designated utility customer or customers. I'll give everyone a second, but if anyone has any questions, concerns, or other feedback regarding this working definition, please feel free to share.
I can provide just one additional comment, just to note that this purposefully does not get into the compensation framework. It's simply to try to set forth a definition that captures what's happening. So the question of how this should be compensated or credited or whatever, that's not defined by the definition. It shouldn't be in our view at this point. But we are open to any feedback or other ideas or clarification.
Thank you, Commissioner. We were wondering about how that would fit within the definition. In particular, the clause for the benefit of a geographically separated designated utility company, a customer. It seems, based on what you just described, that we could achieve that objective without that clause in this definition.
Well, I think the reason that we use those words is that we're trying to explain the concept without getting into the kind of fraught technical issue of the impossibility of designating a certain electron to go from point A to point B across the the incumbent utilities infrastructure. But there's going to be within wheeling, right? There is a deliberate intent by the producer of the power to benefit another user of power on the system, through that production. Like what that benefit is exactly, that can be left ambiguous in this definition, because elsewhere in the work that we would like to do, we'll figure out what that means and how it should be defined, how it should be, structured. So, but it is important, I think, to make it clear that there's a purpose to generating this electricity, and there's an arrow pointing to another customer who's not in the exact same spot, location as the generator. We have to make that distinction clear as well, because it's different than just generating it for your own use, right? Yeah, yeah.
We were hoping, we thought it would be more plain vanilla if we could somehow get that directional arrow concept in this, as opposed to using the term benefit, because as you say, we'll need to describe benefits, both on the benefits and costs, both on the transmitting side and the receiving side at some point.
Right.
But yeah, that was.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to consider whether or not there's another word other than benefit that will describe that same kind of connection, right?
Delivery to something that
Yeah.
acknowledges that electricity is going from
Point A to
number
point B.
one to number two.
Right. Delivery is a challenging term, right?
Yeah,
Because
it
it's not actually being delivered. Like the customer on the other side can't rely on that generator to make sure their lights stay on. Like that's still the responsibility of the incumbent utility. So
And he's not getting the electricity that's actually being produced. by
that's
the
right.
generator.
That's right. Yeah. Unless they happen to be right next door and there's no intervening,
True.
So, but yeah, we can consider that as an issue that maybe a little more thought could go into and consider, but potentially I think you could also maybe leave it alone, understanding that elsewhere in the framework, all of us are going to define what that means anyway. And that can have a number of different meanings.
Yes. Oh, well, I think we'd be okay with that. Can I stay on the arrow concept? We did have a question on our side. Does this definition apply to customers number one and number two? They're both on the same island necessarily?
I think they'd have to be. That's a good clarification. Yeah, it would be too complicated to try to figure it out across islands.
That's what we thought as well. We just wanted to make sure.
We can just include it in the same service territory, like something like that type of language. We've done it with CBRE too, right?
Yeah.
Because we also isolated just for the island in terms of capacity. But like what you were saying earlier, Peter, is that, like right now we're just having a discussion, right?
Right.
But I mean, we have to March 21st, right? To, you can provide comments, edits, if you want to make adjustments, everybody has that opportunity here, right? So we're open to that, but right now we're just kind of discussing it. And if you have other thoughts, you can let us know now, or you can put it on writing, later. Yeah. So we're open to that. Yeah.
Thanks, Anand.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Hey, Henry, if you can, and if you guys have like recommendations or questions, can you put it in writing and maybe suggestions so that we can address it and with, I guess, further thought that might be helpful to. I'm looking at Henry's comments and I'm hearing you and it seems like you guys have a bunch of recommendations, so it would be really nice to get all of your comments in writing so that we can try to mesh everything together.
We'll make sure that we do that.
Thank you.
Commissioner. Thank you.
Yeah, and also give us more fodder for next,
Yeah.
you know, next stakeholder meeting, right? Because we have something to discuss, right? And they actually have, you know, feedback from everybody.
But just also to note, there's a second definition of intragovernmental wheeling we'll be getting to. This is intended to be broad enough to encompass both kind of the overall meaning of wheeling, whether it's intragovernmental or retail or whatever. So it's not restricted to just intragovernmental yet.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments on that key language for the benefit. And I was just curious, I think I know the answer to this, but was it intended to, how would that reflect or not reflect any benefit to other grid users of the grid, you know, apart from people who are taking advantage of wheeling? Would the notion that there be some benefit to other utility customers be embedded in this, or we're sort of staying away from that for now, I think? If that makes
I
sense.
think that it isn't in a part of this. I think that's part of the benefit discussion, and that would be part of the compensation framework. It would be, you know, considered at that time in the cost benefit analysis what benefits are being spread around or what costs are being spread around. Like that's all part of it.
That's kind of what I thought. That makes sense. Yeah, sorry, I had one other quick. This is probably not important necessarily, but the word partnership with a private developer just sort of stuck out a little bit insofar as it's more of a contractual. I would just suggest that maybe it could be considered, certainly a kind of partnership, but it's kind of a contractual relationship. And technically speaking, many third-party agreements of that nature I'm familiar with actually disclaim any partnership, right? So there's no joint venture, that kind of thing. But I think that's kind of an overly technical suggestion, but just throwing that out there for consideration as well.
Agreement, formal agreement. No, sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, no, sorry. No. And I agree with you. I mean, that'd be helpful, that partnership. That's like in terms of defining it, either a contract or formal agreement, you know, between two parties.
I think the big thing we were trying to get at, though, is that they have to have some sort of ownership stake. The actual agency has it, because then it separates itself from just a regular IPP. They have to have some sort of agreement in place.
To the point that's being made about the benefit that Hawaiian Electric's mentioning, what if the language said owned by the incumbent utility based on a contract with a geographically separate designated utility customer or customers?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Sorry. So it's owned by the incumbent utility, and then you're taking out for the benefit of. So it'd be owned by the incumbent utility based on a contract with a geographically separate designated utility customer or customers. So it's not tied to this vague notion of a benefit. And it's kind of addressing this issue of the electrons going directly point to point. And it's based on that relationship, which in this case would be a contractual relationship.
I think it's a good thing to think about. I'm not sure there would necessarily be, you know, internal contracts between a single government agency, between one location of that single agency and another location. So I'm not sure that would apply to all situations.
Well, I think, see, I was looking at that originally, but it looks like this is implying going outside the exporting entity and going to another entity. So like it's a whole nother question to discuss if we're talking about intra-organizational or intra-agency. This definition may need to change as well if we're trying to incorporate that.
Well,
But to get to, I guess, Commissioner Yost's point is, can't we address some of these concerns through a definition?
Yeah.
Because I think if we try to tweak too much, this particular phrase, we're still not going to cover everyone's concerns that I'm hearing here. So it might be better to basically flesh it out in a definition rather than taking apart this particular statement.
Part of this also, the word customer is intended to be used the way that the utility uses that term. And I believe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like a single state agency has multiple accounts, right? Customer accounts with the utility. And so when you're in different locations, it might be the Department of Health in two different locations, but they're actually two separate customers, account holders under HECO's definition. So that's what we were kind of going for there, using that word customer specifically, but that can be adjusted. Yeah, like Commissioner Kawai says, that would be helpful. But that was the intent, was to think about the utilities.
Said customer, that means one thing, and it could be intra. If you said customer account, that means something very specific, but that could be also the same agency or a different.
Yeah,
agency.
you might, if you just added the word account instead of saying customer, that might clarify it in that sense. But that was the intent. So maybe we can make that a little clearer.
Yeah, along that same thread, I wanted to follow up briefly with Kevin Oda online with Hawaiian Electric. He asked, does it have to be a customer? And says, I guess it depends on the definition of customer. Kevin, did you want to clarify or add anything to the discussion? Was that sufficient? If nothing more for that, we can move on to our next definition for intergovernmental wheeling. So our working definition, Our working definition for intergovernmental wheeling, as seen in the work plan, is the process by which a federal, state, or local governmental entity, such as a state agency or school, that is a customer of an incumbent electric utility exports electricity generated from renewable sources, either through a partnership with a private developer or through self or co-ownership of generation. And this exported electricity is transmitted via the infrastructure owned by the incumbent utility for the benefit of a geographically separate designated beneficiary, which must be another government agency. Does anyone have?
So in the first instance, you say at the very beginning, it says governmental entity, and at the end, it says government agency. So I'd recommend changing that last agency to entity, so it could also include a school, which isn't necessarily an agency.
And just learning what we learned from the definition from the legislature, I think we should not use the word another at the end, because it tends to suggest that it's a separate government entity or agency. We should just make sure that our language is broad enough so that it could be within a single agency or entity, I guess. So we should think about that, taking Kylie's clarification into account.
Any comments online?
Okay, thank you. Next, we can move on to our next discussion topic relating to the exchange or the sale of that excess energy. Our discussion prompt for this section is whether the wheeling electric customer should only be permitted to sell excess energy to the incumbent utility, or if the wheeling customer should be able to provide the generation to connected agencies using the incumbent utility's infrastructure. This topic is meant to address how the excess energy can be sold and to whom it can be sold. Does anyone have any questions, concerns, or other feedback on this topic?
Well, let's dive in. Go ahead, Doug. I might be long.
Is provided. Don't tempt me. So I guess provide is intended to encompass both sale and maybe not sale? Or is that intentional, or in other words, we're using the word provide as opposed to sell, just above it, sell excess energy versus provide. Just curious.
I take that feedback, and one of our initial concerns was that we don't want anybody being labeled as the seller of energy so that they don't fall in the definition of a public utility. So we're a little bit cautious on how we use the term sale versus a different. But again, to Naomi's point, if anybody has specific concerns about that kind of language, certainly we can discuss it more. But that was the big concern, is to not have it be sale.
Doug, especially given that the legislature is looking at a broader wheeling type of thing. So what we don't want is the sale to be considered a public utility type of transaction. So just, I know your mind's going right now on, think about how we can address that particular issue.
Sure.
All the
Thank you.
attorneys in the room.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
Okay, Peter, go.
Yeah, here we go. So the concern here is with the term excess energy. In our discussions at Hawaiian Electric, the concept of wheeling arises because we think of it as an opportunity to create generation in a locale where there is no local load center. So there's generation and it needs to go somewhere. And that's when it's wheeled. We would argue, or hopefully my colleagues would let me argue, that the sale of excess energy, that concept suggests that there is a local load center where the generation is. And in that respect, to the extent that the generation is serving, is owned by a particular customer account, let's say, special case, and serving that same local load account and exporting the rest, that's our smart DER program right now. So that's already accommodated for the concept of excess energy. But we're thinking that maybe wheeling is a strict case where there is no local load and 100% is exported somewhere.
So I actually didn't work on the this particular verbiage, and I tend to agree with you, Peter. I think that we may, but that's just good feedback to consider generally, right? Because you could have a situation where there's very small amount of load at the generation site and they're covering that, and then everything else is, I guess, technically excess. But it would be preferable probably and cleaner from an administrative standpoint to have things designed and interconnected in a way where all of the energy that is generated is going to the wheeling program. If you start dividing it up and confusing it with other tariffs and so forth, it becomes, problematic, and there could be confusion, customer confusion, certainly administrative problems with the utility. So, I mean, I personally kind of prefer the concept of wheeling that is strictly wheeling.
There was a school on North Shore that wanted to put solar on its roof, but also had a big field space where they wanted to put more panels up and have the benefit go to another school. that's not the same location. Would the DER program cover that?
No, I mean, I think you could separately interconnect that separate array that's in the field and just have that tracked separately through a separate meter. I think would be the kind of my suggestion in that situation, and have the school focus on its own needs through a separate system that is connected through the DER tariffs. And then if they wanted to do wheeling and support other schools with an array in the field next door, they would connect that through a separate meter.
So you're suggesting two different programs, wheeling and a DRR type.
Well, there already is a DER program, and we're not suggesting, getting rid of that. We're trying to accommodate the scenario where the purpose of the generation is to benefit a customer that's located somewhere else, not on the site of generation.
Got it.
And so that's a program that does not currently exist. And we're trying to figure out a way to stand something up that is simple and easy to administer and, it's likely to work.
That makes sense, Commissioner, that we could work to find a way for a customer to be a member in both a smart DER program and a wheeling program, that they wouldn't be, your ticket into one gate doesn't prohibit you from entering the other, or vice versa. We'd need to find a way to build that to make sense, certainly.
So maybe we need to I'm not sure why this is here, actually, the excess energy discussion. You want to clarify?
Yeah, I can answer that. So one of our big concerns that we want to hear feedback from, particularly from the state agencies, because what we were receiving, as Mr. Abraham noted in our public comments from the agencies, is they essentially want credits. They don't even necessarily want the sale or providing money directly to Hawaiian Electric for using the actual lines. So we're trying to get at what government entities, particularly how they would like to structure a program that is wheeling, that is separate from, a clean energy program or a DER or anything like that. If it's because what the feedback that we're receiving was much more of less wheeling and more like community-based solar wants. So if they have specific ideas on how they want to see that quote unquote sale or providing that energy, if they want to have a bigger, a space for land that they're providing, or if they want to be the active participant in the actual sale. So that's kind of why we're kicking it to agencies to tell us what you want. I don't know if any agencies that have provided comments are online, but we would definitely like to hear from you.
There are a couple questions online. I think we have been kind of circling them. Henry, did you want to unmute and ask your question?
No, I just had the same question about excess energy and what it meant. And having a separate meter makes sense.
Thank you. Does anyone want to follow up on that, or are we good on that point? Kevin Oda also brought up that his question, could CBRE be revised to accommodate these types of situations? I think that was along your scenario, Kylie. Does anyone have anything they'd like to say on that one?
I can jump in on, so yes, potentially, but in terms of intergovernmental wheeling, CBRE and intergovernmental wheeling could turn out to be kind of similar programs or even somehow merged together. But I think CBRE serves a different function in the way it's been currently envisioned, and may also discussions within the commission are looking at it as a potential mechanism to assist specifically lower income ratepayers. That's just very preliminary, but this is Wheeling in an intergovernmental context anyway focuses on benefiting government specifically. That's not really the purpose of CBRE, so there might still be value, even if they kind of operate in similar ways. There may be value to having them be separate programs anyway.
I agree with Commissioner Collin. I think that CBRE should be considered separate. The thing is that the way that the CBRE is structured is that we have a certain amount of megawatts, but the thing is that with wheeling, the CBRE could be considered an alternative. It doesn't necessarily have to be like an option, right? We have DER, CBRE, all these options. Wheeling is just going to be another option to address that ultimate goal, right? To increase renewable energy, in the state. So I see them as two separate things: the wheeling program and CBRE. I mean, CBRE could be considered as an alternative if somebody says, okay, well, if you have to choose between the two, maybe CBRE works better for them than the state wheeling. Yeah, but because once you start introducing things that are very similar, then you have issues with tariff, right? Because then is it which tariff are you going to be using? Is it the CBRE tariff or the new wheeling tariff? I mean, it gets kind of jumbled up that way. I just feel it should be kept separately, in my opinion.
I have a quick follow-up question for us to consider. So what should happen to sales that exceed a certain facility's current billing amounts? I think that's one of the, takeaways that we wanted out of the prompt. Does anyone have any thoughts? I'll repeat the question. What should happen to sales that exceed a certain facility's current billing amounts?
Was this a question from a government agency or entity? This is your question. Can you clarify then? I mean, so if you're thinking of a single government agency, say, and that government agency has multiple locations, but they have a total electric bill across all facilities of $1 million, and they generate at one of their locations $2 million. Is that your question? Like, what would happen to let's say they had got 100% credit for the first million, and then there's an extra million left over.
Exactly.
What would happen? I mean, so it's a good question, and I guess the question is whether or not you would cap the amount of generation at, to be no more than the total bill of that customer. I mean, that could be one provision of the framework. I mean, so I guess give some insight from the utilities point of view.
In our existing DER programs, and I'll use that term really broadly to include net energy metering, our interim DER programs like Grid Supply Plus, Smart Export, and Smart DER, all of these programs have financial caps based on individual customer bills, where the attribution of benefit or credit is limited to some portion or the entirety of a customer bill, maybe down to the minimum charge. We think that concept remains appropriate. Part of the discussion will be, where, how do you set a cap? What does it have financial limits within or outside of billing parameters? And then adjoining that, if there is in fact excess, how that can be assigned. What wheeling may present is some assignment of benefit challenges. If you have, let's say, I'm just going to put up a construct, but if you have a large generator that thinks he can deliver all of his energy and have it used by his preferred designated customer, but maybe he needs a secondary beneficiary and a tertiary beneficiary to assign out all the energy that's being generated. How do we build that construct? And good grief, how does the utility administer that kind of thing? But if that's a condition that we want to address, then Those are the building blocks. That's the house we got to build.
For a single state agency, like for example, the Department of Transportation, how many electric bills does the utility have with the Department of Transportation in the state of Hawaii? I mean, there are many customer accounts associated with that agency. Is that correct?
Yes, there are dozens, if not hundreds.
Okay.
I would think that at some point you could construct it so that you identify related accounts for a single agency so that it would say Department of Transportation, let's say they have 100 accounts, they would have to list the 100 accounts that would be associated with as far as benefits or credits or something like that.
Yeah, how hard is that for HECO to accomplish, to figure out associated accounts?
To figure out the associated accounts, just that identification process isn't difficult. It's the challenge is to the extent that we want to administer this and assign benefit almost on a rotating basis, perhaps that gets hard because we'd like to automate that. And that's, I don't think that's something we've ever contemplated, generally speaking. As you've seen in our existing DER programs, benefits are attributed to a particular account, they're capped, and in some instances, they're credited during a calendar year and perhaps forfeited at the end of the calendar year. That was really challenging to build 10 years ago, but that's what we have now.
Go ahead.
Billing right now?
There is, we don't aggregate the, okay, there's a couple of concepts of aggregation where we have a large customer, let's say Joint Base Pearl Harbor, for example, where we deliver power to several meter points on the base. And we aggregate that on a time coincident basis, and we're calculating a bill as if there were 1 meter and 1 metered usage. We do that. But what we don't do is we don't say, okay, you have 5 McDonald's restaurants at 5 different locations. We don't create one bill that aggregates the load of those customers at their different locations. The third aggregation is just an administrative one, which is probably what many of the government agencies receive is we send a master bill that will have basically all of the individual bills attached to it with an aggregate total on the top, but there will be individual customer account locations support for the components of that total. That's another aggregation, but probably not the one that you were asking about.
So does an agency like Department of Transportation receive a master bill like that and then give you one check every month, or how does that work?
My understanding, and it's limited here, Commissioner, sorry, that there are master bills, but agencies may receive multiple master bills. Certainly within the Department of Transportation, harbors, airports, and highways get separate bills, and they may get separate master bills. I'm not sure how far down they're separated.
You know, maybe it'd be helpful also to reach out specifically to the agencies that have been interacting with us to get more feedback in terms of how they could see it working logistically in terms of how they pay for their energy. Because we've got to align these two ways of doing things and not try to create something that's unworkable, right?
Absolutely. We're happy to help on the concepts, but there are folks at the back office at Hawaiian Electric who you really need a clear path to sensible implementation.
I guess a better understanding from my part as to how the billing to these agencies are handled. When you say accounts and master accounts and sub accounts, exactly how do how do agencies get billed? Is it like one bill or is it separate mini bills or how? And when the check is paid or when the bill is paid, is it, I assume it's not by separate checks or separate accounts. It's how is it paid?
We could probably provide more information on how that's done for
Yeah, I
certain
think,
agencies that is an illustrative discussion.
yeah, I think a better understanding of how it's accounted for
Yeah.
could help us better understand what the issue is.
It's really just a timing thing and perhaps an aggregation of funds. Each bill is calculated as an individual account, just as your home and commissioner's home. They are all separate bills, but how they're packaged together and paid may vary. Yeah. But certainly we could get more information on that.
Sorry, just
Go ahead,
can't shed any light on that. But as a data point, just flagging that there was some discussion of this, as I recall, and Peter, maybe you might recall as well in the green tariff docket. So I think there was some discussion about, of course, that ended up being a credit concept. And I think we talked about the different UH campuses each had different bills and somehow we were working through some arrangement in that regard. Just flagging that as a data point. Might be in the record, might be helpful.
I think where we landed on that, Doug, was a credit just to the Manoa campus.
Okay.
So it was just one. And as a pilot, that was definitely easier for us to
Yeah, there was some discussion.
work that out.
How
Yeah,
that could work. Yeah.
right. Thank you. Your memory's good.
So just going back to the slide for future discussion in this, one thing that the commission wants to understand is, again, to Abby's point, once you exceed your bill, then your Hawaiian Electric would presumably be, there's a $2 million, they produce $2 million in energy, they only consume $1 million. It's presumptive that then Hawaiian Electric would then pay for the extra $1 billion in energy. So again, I think the question we're trying to get at is if there should be a cap, and I'm sure people will have differing opinions on whether there should be a cap. So that's one of the topics that we would like people to think about and discuss in providing us feedback.
Oh, Henry, did you want to follow up with a question or comment?
Yes. The discussion of aggregation also, I think, affects the time of use, where you can export at one point and import at another time. And the aggregation, can you combine 1 month to another month? The idea that you have 2 million you're producing, but you're only using 1 million, can you produce it in 1 month and use it in 2 months? I don't think that has been made clear yet.
I think that's an example, Henry, of the kind of feedback we're looking for. I mean, right now, certain DER tariffs have annual reconciliation, for example. So that would get to your point if that type of structure was also recommended for wheeling.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll put it in our comments.
Thank you, everyone. Any final, thoughts before we move on to our next discussion topic?
I have a question for the utility. How do you feel about the second part? If the wheeling customer should be able to provide the generation to connected agencies using the incumbent utilities infrastructure.
I sit in the rates group at Hawaiian Electric, so I may answer this differently from my technical colleagues. We see, although at the outset of this discussion, Commissioner Yost and I discussed about the locational differences of generation and receiving electricity at another point. In terms of the financial aspects of a wheeling transaction, we recognize that blue electrons generated here are not going to be the same blue electrons being consumed at some remote location, as Mr. Curtis recognizes, maybe even at a different time. So the concept of using the utilities infrastructure is perhaps almost not where the focus should be. What we're looking at is what is the nature of the benefits, maybe across all participants and how they're allocated. There is, let's say there's some renewable energy that has an opportunity to come on the system. Certainly, if it were to come on at this point in time, it would lower costs because it's cheaper than our fossil energy. Is it costless to bring in this renewable energy? Maybe not. It needs to be interconnected somewhere. That interconnection and timing of that needs to be orchestrated with the rest of the energy on the flowing through the infrastructure. So there are costs, there are benefits, puts and takes. And I think whether wheeling serves a public interest is in large part how well all of those interests and those benefits costs, how well are they reasonably distributed among direct participants and indirect participants. And I think that's a large part of what we need to examine. We acknowledge the concept, but really how does this array to everyone who's affected?
I had one more point on the excess energy point or question, which is, I know that a lot of government buildings are in need of energy efficiency upgrades. And so I think that the program should be designed so as not to create a use it or lose it system where the beneficiary no longer has an incentive to use less energy because they need to take energy from the wheeling generator. So if there's some way to reassign the electricity to a different or credit to another customer, that would be ideal.
Does anyone have any follow-up on the idea of transferring the credits?
I think we've already raised the question about whether or not it would be appropriate to wheel across governmental agencies. So I guess that just raises the question for feedback from everyone as to whether it would be acceptable from the beginning to develop a plan where a single generator, government entity or agency generates a bunch of power with the initial intent to benefit multiple governmental agencies or entities. And as long as that was the way it was set up from the beginning, and let's say for the sake of argument that they were not going to come anywhere near close to the actual load of those combined beneficiaries, Like, would that be acceptable?
Okay, thank you, everyone. If there's nothing else on that topic, we'll move on to our last big discussion segment. Before we get into our questions, we wanted to provide an overview of this concept of renewable energy zones. So for those unfamiliar, renewable energy zones have been identified by Hawaiian Electric for its service territories. Shown on the slide is just the one for Oahu, but you can find the other ones on Hawaiian Electric's website. The idea of renewable energy zones help to understand the most valuable land for renewable energy projects with interconnection for large projects, kind of more readily available. If government agencies have land in these zones, it might be the most beneficial. Government agencies on the call, if you have any questions or have any thoughts, including possible land in any of these areas, we would love to hear from you. We can go to the next slide. So keeping that in mind, we want to discuss general implementation interests and also concerns. Do any state agencies on the call wish to express any additional interest or concerns regarding general implementation, including the availability of space for possible site locations? Seeing none, I would like to ask another question. Imagining all the concerns of project implementation, what are the top 3 challenges that agencies believe they will face when building, commissioning, and running a project?
Are there any government agencies?
There are a few. Not very talkative today, but but that's okay. This is an open discussion.
Also, for those agencies, again, we had an opportunity to provide feedback, right, by March 21st, right? So even though you don't say anything here, if you have something to comment on, please do so, because we really want to hear from the state agencies or the local agencies, because, this is the intra-governmental really we're trying to address right now. And we want to make sure, we hear your concerns and or challenges that you may receive if we try to implement such a program.
Are we covering the developer perspective at all? Thank you. The developer's perspective at all to understand what would be their incentive to develop these types of projects? As opposed to just doing regular traditional utility scale development projects?
I think a lot of that's kind of open-ended, like how the developer would interact, whether they would just build it, like turnkey style, whether someone else would come in to run it. I think, I don't think we've really fleshed that out. But if anyone has any, thoughts on that, more than happy to discuss.
Yeah, speaking to, I guess, some developers, when you say small IPP type companies that are interested in partnering with agencies who have land to help some of their energy needs on their property, more specifically like the DHHL type properties. Developers are interested in partnering with DHHL to help produce energy on their property to help the residents. And so we're getting a lot of inquiries about if that's possible, what they need, and just basically direct them to DHHL and Hawaii Electric. So this kind of, we put that question out because we know that HSCO, we've had that conversation with HSCO, we've had that conversation with DLNR about opening up state lands to benefit just general, help the grid, essentially, to figure out ways to help the grid.
Does anyone from Hawaiian Electric have anything to add, including concerns regarding siting and anything about looking at renewable, energy zones?
I guess I can add a little bit more. So that renewable energy zone map that you showed, that was part of a initial study that we did to look at, how much solar is available generally in different locations. And we have some general requirements of what it would take to interconnect those levels. But the reality part is we really need, folks to offer up land and work with developers to actually get these implemented, because we don't want to be building out, a gigawatt of interconnection if a gigawatt doesn't show up. I mean, that's just not practical. So I think one of the asks that we had from the last call regarding wheeling was kind of understanding where there's actual land available for this program and kind of what levels of interconnection we're looking at. Because we're ordered to do the res. And we want to do the res. Aside from the res, we want to be able to know and provide guidance on how we can better interconnect these types of projects. But we kind of have to know where and how big. So just putting a plug for that. Thanks.
Following up on that, so are there any further technical concerns relating to projects, or are they more administrative or legal concerns? If anyone has anything to add on that.
Thanks for that last comment. It actually raises, should there be a minimum amount of energy being exported through wheeling? Like, do you have views on that? Like, what would make sense since what you were saying was you're looking for, more scalable types of projects that'll export energy.
For wheeling itself,
Yeah.
I'm looking to my colleagues, but I don't think we have a minimum, yeah.
But that would create challenges for you if you had a lot of wheeling contracts, and then you have to accommodate that, of all sizes, right? I guess that's the point I'm trying to get at.
I don't think
Going to your last point about the interconnections.
Well, I mean, if they're small, so let's say you have a bunch of sort of DER type sizes. I mean, to us, we would just handle it like the regular DER programs. And then I think the part we got to figure out is how do you compensation and then the crediting. But aside from that, technically it's the same thing.
Okay, so no.
Yeah. I think, I mean, my assumption is this wheeling program is going to be more looking at trying to find large areas. And then that's where, really we would follow typical interconnection processes and see where, I don't know, improvements can be made or whatever to help accommodate it.
I think generally it's just more cost effective for the developer to develop bigger projects than smaller ones, especially when you have to give a portion of the proceeds to the government entity that is interested in hosting a project. And in the CBRE context, I think that no, there haven't been any small projects proposed. So I don't know if it's necessarily a problem that will actually happen.
Related to this idea of a minimum threshold, another question is, are there times when the export of this energy should not be allowed? I know we talked about a super large project could come with issues, but do you have anything to
Sorry,
beyond
can
like
you-
an extreme issue. I can repeat it.
Yeah.
Are there times that the export of this energy in this hypothetical wheeling scenario should not be allowed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that if it's like a large project, we would have similar, like large meaning, tens of megawatts. We would treat it similar to like an IPP project where we have dispatch control. We can charge a battery. I'm assuming, we would probably have requirements like that because there'd probably be limits anyway. So charging a battery and then discharging when it's needed.
Thank you.
Another one on the technical. So, the last question you responded about, you basically, even for small loads, treat it more like a DER type project. Are there technical issues in terms of implementation? If something like this went through, like, would there be a delay because you have to do something online? Or is it something you can actually implement fairly quickly?
Wait, so your question is if there's project size similar to like something that would go through a DER tariff, a smart DER tariff, were to come in to connect?
No. If we were to do, if this was to go through intergovernmental or retail wheeling, I'm just wondering if there's technical issues that would cause a delay for that, that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, large projects, thing got messed up before on what the limits were, but large, megawatt type projects, they would essentially need an interconnection requirement study. Yeah, but that's typical process of anything.
Is that determined on, because we're talking about wheeling, so assuming some infrastructure is there already, right? The wires. So it'd be depending on the wire, right? Depending on the size of the project, right? And then what energy they're going to wheel, right? Through some X infrastructure, right? And I assume that's part of the IRS, right? To really look at if something's there now, right? Because right, typical IRS is something's not there, right? And it has to come in, right? And either the interconnection side or then, right, similar to what we did, right, to get Kahukuwina, right? The backbone infrastructure had to be built until that could get interconnected into that. So it all, like you said, Ken, right? It really depends on what project is generating it, right? And then if you're using it in the wheeling sense, it's what infrastructure is there or not there, right? To wheel that energy somewhere.
Yeah, like the equipment, if the equipment has the capability to wheel that amount of power through.
But I think you would deal with that separately through the normal interconnection process, and which takes into account the distinct, unique costs associated with interconnecting a certain project. So you wouldn't have to, I don't think, take that into account in terms of the ultimate formula of compensation, for example, or the way that costs and benefits are allocated. Like that would be, we recognize we can't touch the unique costs associated with interconnection and the unique technical requirements of that process. Like that's a safety and operational mandate. Like we have to follow that normal process. But that's something that is familiar to anybody trying to interconnect a new energy project. They got to go through that thing. They got to deal with it, and they hopefully have to get as much information earlier in the process so they can predict what those costs are going to be more successfully in order to figure out their own financial cost benefit analysis. But the ultimate like credit or payment or cost benefit allocation, that's a totally separate thing that could remain constant is kind of what I'm emphasizing here. I think that would be the goal, is to have that remain constant and have the differentiation still be in the interconnection side of things in terms of the infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, like a new transformer or whatever.
No, I agree. For the technical aspects, I think that's pretty much set by the rules, right? Rule 14H and everything. So it's in there. And then just like in terms of like the size, if it's a certain size, there's a threshold, right? Or if you need a SCADA or anything like that, right? So those are all established, I think, right? So I think that's not a thing we argue. I think it's, yeah, like Colin was saying, Commissioner Colin. Also, I had a question. Whether you're talking about the REC, the renewable energy zones, right? Is that also tied into the locational value map too? I mean, in terms of like hosting capacity and all that, is that kind of tied into that too? I'm just kind of curious because I know you have a locational value map too,
Yeah.
and you have REZ too. I'm just wondering if that's tied into that in terms of hosting capacity, because you can identify areas where that you have sufficient hosting capacity for a new project, right?
Yeah, locational value map is looked at the distribution level.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry.
This is the transmission side.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay. Makes sense.
So I just wanted to highlight Henry's comment that producing energy in one REZ for use in another raises energy equity issues. Henry, you also had a question. Does a large system trigger a community benefit agreement?
Yes. And we've been having some discussion about size. So what happens with large systems? Do they operate the same way as the requirements under the RFP proceedings for community benefits and community notification and all of that? I mean, like Waianae has been upset about the growth of CBRE within their community, and the PUC wisely delayed additional systems going into their community to work things out. Is this a way of bypassing that, or do they have to comply with those regulations?
Henry, this is Colin. I think that's an issue that's worth just fleshing out a little bit and considering. If there was a project built on top of state buildings that currently exist, then that likely wouldn't have an impact on anyone. But if it's on vacant land and it's nearby a community and there's an issue, then you'd want to have consideration of that. So I think, yeah, we just raise it as an issue and try to, we can all start thinking about that.
Thanks, everyone. Just wrapping this up, is there any final discussion points for general implementation interests or concerns before we kind of start going into our close? Not seeing any. We can.
Yeah, and this is something that we talked about at our first stakeholder meeting, Abby, but I know that the agencies out there are not being super vocal today, but one of the going back to the res slide, one of the concerns we want to raise is agencies and whether or not they have actual locations that they are considering at this time. Again, each of the islands has each of Hawaiian Electric's islands has these specific renewable energy zones with where they're anticipating or where they can have larger capacity coming in. So again, it's provided as like a guide for some out there that might have bigger projects. But if any of the agencies out there have specific land that you are considering, it would help further this discussion and how you're envisioning this. So if you don't have that readily available right now, it's just something that we would ask for you to consider having these conversations moving forward.
Thank you, Kelly.
Can I add
Oh,
add a plug to that? We have the Hawaiian Electric has done RFIs on potential areas for development. We have one open right now for a long-term RFP, and we haven't gotten much through those solicitations. And these are just RFIs, just knowing where things could be. So yeah, whoever's listening and they have land, we encourage them to submit through that as well, because that's data points for us. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so this, following up on what Kelly was saying, for any state agencies or anyone else on the call, we would love to hear from you. Please submit any feedback on the proposed work plan, or other materials provided in this proceeding, before March 21st, so about a month. In these slides, which will be filed to CDMS, the Commission's Case and Docket Management System, you can follow this link and use the docket number 2024-0200 to submit any comments and feedback.
I just wanted to add too. So if you look at every meeting has like a focus, right, and everything. So I just wanted guys to point that out to you. And if you guys feel that we need to discuss other things, other topics need to be added to that or amended, let us know early on ahead of time so that we have the right items to address at the meeting. So that we already proposed these, but then we didn't get a chance to get your feedback, because we just put it in order. If you could give us some feedback, even on the work plan itself as well. In terms of the focus, especially for the next future meetings. Thanks.
Thanks, Sanad. And piggybacking off of that point, we highlighted, some components of the proposed work plan, but, reiterating again, please, we'd love to hear from you, and feel free to comment on these topics, this discussion, and whatever else comes to mind. Here's a little roadmap of the remaining meetings for this outreach part of this docket. Our next meeting will be in April. And again, I can briefly just go over the focuses. Our next meeting in April, we're aiming to focus on design of electricity wheeling and intergovernmental electricity wheeling requirements for interconnections, limitation considerations, such as size, scope, and where generation is needed. So a little bit more on the technical side. And then the fourth meeting will be June 24th and focus on costs and rate design, how to set a rate credit, what cost should the wheeling customer pay to utilize the incumbent utilities infrastructure. Our final stakeholder meeting will be held August 26th and focus on finalization of discussion and recommendations of stakeholders and possible alternatives to wheeling. Again, these are subject to change depending on the feedback, but that's our current roadmap as it stands. If there are no other closing remarks.
I would just say one other thing to the agencies out there. We do have if you, back to the definition, if you are anticipating a close in proximity relationship that you are intending to directly wheel, or if it's something that what you're anticipating is selling generation back to Hawaiian Electric, essentially. So that is one of the considerations. Again, we're specifically addressing agencies, where you're looking at locations, what kind of program you're looking into, if you want to use the lines, so to speak, or if you want to be a non-active participant and just help facilitate the build and sell back in. Those are big considerations that we're looking at right now.
Can you put that last slide up one more time?
With the next upcoming meetings, yeah.
I know that Commissioner Kauai mentioned that there were discussions with some developers who are interested in developing projects on DHHL lands in particular. So I was wondering if maybe the June 24th, there could be some sort of developer presentation to explain what kind of rate structure or credit would be necessary to make the projects pencil out. Because I'm just assuming that most of the agencies involved wouldn't be savvy in developing their own projects. They need a developer involved.
You have any developers in mind, or I'm just curious, I just wondering if you had the contact. Okay.
I mean, we can reach out.
Okay.
Yeah,
we're willing to.
A lot of these developers that I've talked to, at least, they don't necessarily have a presence here, but they are interested in small scale type of development. And so, and one of the, like I said, one of the customers that they thought about was DHHL. So if I see them again and they approach me, I can give them, pass on their name, but I'm not sure if they're even serious, how serious they are at this point.
I can,
But if you have developers,
Sounds like- I wasn't sure if you had someone in mind.
I have
Good.
some thoughts, but I
Okay.
wouldn't want to call out their names without.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
whoever-
yeah, definitely. No, definitely. I'm not saying, I'm not asking for names.
Yeah.
But also I wanted to shout out for the state and county agencies. You know, I know the feedback we got from the agencies is that there's the concern about the bills and they want to lower the bills. That's kind of the main concern, whether it's Wheeling or some other type of program. So it'd be helpful if, you know, if you're in the area, feel free to come down in person, you know, and discuss with us. So I'm just opening that up to you guys as well. Yeah. Thank you.
If no one else has anything to add, this concludes today's stakeholder meeting. Thank you all again for your presence and participation. We will see you on April 22nd. Thank you.